one of the big challenges with putting in a native wildflower garden is a lot of people don't do it. So knowing what to do and where to put plants can kind of be intimidating. And a lot of us don't have landscaping design degrees, so what do we do? So what I wanted to do today was take you guys through, I have 29 new wildflowers, and there's 3 different areas I'm gonna be focusing on, from my monarch milkweed garden to my native wildflower garden here to a new section that I'm just gonna be adding to, because why not? And I'm gonna be taking these 29 plants and I'm gonna be taking you through the different ways that I think through how to place the plants. So when considering doing a native wildflower garden, I've given you guys a lot of tips in one of my past videos, which I'll link down in the description below. So these are actually gonna be different tips, and they're actually gonna be more about design. Because last time some of the main themes is choose native and then pick plants that like similar conditions. You don't wanna have a full shade plant trying to make its way next to a full sun plant and then pick a location that's semi-shade. Probably both plants are gonna not be happy. So either go for a full sun location, full shade location, or maybe a partial sun location, and find plants that like similar soil conditions. That's kind of the crash course in some of the things you want to think about. But when it comes to doing design, so some of the things that you want to think about is how are you going to layer the plants together? And there's kind of some different patterns that I would like you guys to think about. So if you're looking for a field look, you want to generally just go with tall plants. But a lot of times we're working with areas and we're not doing a full field, but we want to have that very wild look. So one of the first steps that you want to do is pick what is the focal point of this section of the garden. So while this was a very expansive, broad look, I did still create some focal points at either end. And that's what you always want to consider, is how are you going to bring symmetry in? Because humans, we like things that are balanced and symmetrical. It's in our deep, like, cave lady, caveman DNA, way down in there. Our bodies just say like, ooh, symmetry, I like that. What's going on there? So mimicking that even in a wildlife garden or wildflower garden is a good thing to do. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is I'm using this window for one of these, because there's actually like 3 little projects going on here. We got our monarch garden that we're going to go add some plants to. We're going to fill in some holes for this native wildflower garden behind me, and then we're going to go and expand in front of that window. So when we think about the window, I think that's a really easy way to think of a focal point. It's a big thing that naturally you and your eye and other people's eyes are going to be drawn to. They're going to say, there's a window there. So making sure we create balanced, symmetric kind of look is a really good thing to do. Now that window already has 2 nice fire bushes around it. But then once you kind of get in between, we've got a couple different patterns we might want to think about. So one of them is thinking about how to do layers front to back. So this is where, you're going to consider taking a plant. And of course, what's great about a lot of the native plant nurseries is they will have information that tells you how tall these plants are going to get. But you may want to think about a plant series that's going to go, I'm going to do one set of plants in the back, and then I'm going to layer it in front, and then I'm going to do my lowest plant in front of that. So I can maybe create 3 tiers. And that is a way, generally, you can create a really easy design. Go high, down to low. But what you'll find is that won't generally feel very wildflowerish. That will feel like a very pretty garden. But when you're looking for that wild look, nature doesn't usually go like, I'm putting a tree and we're only going to have trees in this row, and then we're only going to have hedges in this row, and then we're going to only have flowers at the edge. It does that, but there's a lot of staggering happening. So that's going to really get into like one of our next patterns, and I'm going to show you here with some of these plants. Come here, get closer. So when I was looking at the Mistflower, Calamint, and my wild Petunia, right, all of these are going to get in that 1 to 2 foot range. Some are going to get a little bit wider, some are going to get a little bit taller. So I do want to put the taller ones in that. So I'm going to assume you've considered your space requirements and that you have looked at how tall or wide these can get and that they're going to have enough space. So you're going to start with whatever is going to be your base plant, and you're going to spread it out evenly, right? So usually what I do, and I'll do this actually even at the nurseries, is I will either in my head or physically start laying out the plants to try to get an idea of how am I going to lay them out in the garden. So I knew I'd have these 4. They probably make the most sense to go closest to the structure. I like to put things that are going to go season after season after season closest to the building, because whether it's your house or any type of building, because what you want to do for wildlife is the less you're fussing with them, the better it is for them. So plants that I need to come in and touch, that's actually why I move almost all food plants away from the house, is that I want the wildlife to have spaces that I'm not messing with on a regular frequency, that I kind of am leaving them alone. I'll come and do a prune every few months, but most of the time, that's their space, not my space. And then I can enjoy it from like the window area. So if we just wanted to start with like a basic tear down, we could put these 4 plants. And then we could do, like I showed in the other video, we could do kind of a triangle look. And then we could do these petunias, because in the long run, this is kind of, will create this tear down. Here is a more classic structure design. So you can see 4 calamints in the back, 3 Mistflowers, then 2 wild petunias. It is much more geometric. It's not gonna mimic wild as much. But the thing is that in the wild, that's not how things grow. Usually you have kind of an intermixing of things. So if I wanted to create a little bit more interest, usually plants have things that are kind of popping up in between. So I might actually flip these around and know that this will be a little bit lower. And now it's not as obvious to the human eye that this is a structured area. This look will start to break down the very geometric and defined, and we'll start to create a more wild look, because as these plants start to sprawl and intermix with each other a little bit, because they'll want to grow towards the sun, it will make it look a bit more wild, but not as wild as it could be. And if you want to mix it up some more, is that if you had a bigger area, you start actually flipping some of it around, where most of this is like the Calamint, and then we mix the Petunia back, and then we mix the Petunia back. It smells so pretty. Oh, and if you want to know any of the plant names, I will also put those down in the description below so you can reference them later if you're interested in these specific plants. Now flipping the wild petunias back, we're starting to intermix the plants. We're giving it a little bit less uniform look, which is going to make the eye start to think like this wasn't as manufactured by a person and more by nature. Though we can still play with it. If you know, with the wildflower garden I did here, what I did is I actually did kind of take the coreopsis and I went around in a circle, and then I staggered them so that it didn't feel like I had just planted basically 2 rows of coreopsis. So using staggering will be your friend when it comes to creating a wildflower look. The more things are in nice, tidy, straight lines, the less it's gonna feel wild. And now if we change the shape just a little bit, right, we got the wild petunias in the back, calamints on either end. We've actually pushed the Mistflower a little bit back, and then we've got calamints again, and then Mistflowers coming a little bit forward, which is gonna really, one, help these plants, because the firebush is gonna be trying to block them in. That's not trying, but it is gonna start blocking them in, and it's gonna allow for these ones to get a little bit more full sun, even though they're on the edges, but it's gonna mimic nature more because we've got staggered shapes, things are gonna be intermixing. The Calamint's gonna really wanna grow forward on this side. So this intermixing of plants will really create a look that's more natural and interesting for the eye to look at, while also making it feel appropriate in the suburbs and the urban environments and not feel unkempt and actually totally wild. So final check in the area, we see we've got plenty of space between our 2 fire bushes. We've got a very non-standard symmetric look, but yet it's gonna feel like nature has put this here, but it will look beautiful. We've got really nice colors working together. I'm excited for this install. This next set of plants is really all about filling in gaps. These are where I had a couple plants die on me, and I just really, I'm gonna literally replace them. So that's not really a complicated thing to figure out, right? So I've got my 2 blue-eyed grasses that will replace the blue-eyed grasses that died. I'll put in a blue curl where the blue curl died. But then I have these plants. You know how this goes. You did an impulse buy, and you really do need to figure out, where are you gonna put these? So let's go back into this wildflower garden and we'll talk through different options and ways of thinking about how to go put these in the space, because I want them in the space. And originally where I thought I was gonna put these, over by the Royal Ponciana, it's not gonna work. We're walking in there way too much. The odds are very high we're gonna be stepping on them. And for how gorgeous these flowers are, I really don't wanna do that. So let's go figure out, where are we gonna be installing these ones. Now, most of my focus on figuring out where plants are going to go is on this side. It's the places where I have the most exposed mulch, and my long-term plan is not to keep putting down mulch. As much fun as I have spending hours and hours and hours and days on days putting down mulch, it's super time consuming, and usually I'm doing it in the heat of fall, which is like the worst time to do it. So the more I can get some of my native wildflowers to cover up and fill in these gaps, the better. So now let's talk about my Stokes Aster. I've got 4 of them, and these plants are gorgeous. They deserve to be seen. And here's the things with Stokes Aster is that it stays pretty low for the greenery, but when it comes to the flower, it'll put up these stalks, and then we'll have these nice big flowers. And when you're dealing with an existing garden, what you really want to do is think about where are your holes currently. So obviously I was just backfilling with plants that died. That's a pretty easy one, put like for like. So I'm going to be looking for spaces where they can be really on the front. This is basically what I consider the front of the garden. So I want to find places where there's some holes. These will spread slowly over time, and they actually make a pretty good border plant. But I don't want to plant them in a nice little like 1, 2, 3, 4 row, because again, we're going to end up taking away from that wildflower look, because wildflowers don't tend to be very organized and structured. And a lot of what we're doing, if you notice, is staggering plants, intermixing them here and there so that it looks like one of these grew, dropped seeds, they spread a little bit to the left, they spread a little bit to the right, a little bit up front, a little bit behind, and that's over time and years how it would have naturally spread. So we're mimicking that. So as I look for holes for these 4, I'm going to be thinking about how do I make them intermix without being very organized. We don't want organized and structured looking, even though technically it is. So one of the first thoughts is that I've got these 4 blue-eyed grasses. One of the things I could do is just put these right in between. And we could call it a day. And honestly, that wouldn't be too bad of a look, because it wouldn't be a bad look. It would be a pretty good look. There's already a lot going on, but because these are such large flowers, it will draw your attention. And when you start to notice as a human a very obvious pattern, it doesn't feel natural and wild. So what we should start to consider is that how do we mix them up a little bit more so that they don't feel too obvious? And the pattern that I'm pointing out is that we've got blue-eyed grass Stokes, blue-eyed grass Stokes, blue-eyed grass Stokes, and now all of a sudden we're becoming a much more formal looking edge of a garden versus a wildflower look. So what I'm going to want to do is actually spread these out a bit more and maybe mix something else in. Now remember, we still have that mox bishopweed to work with too. So we have this mox bishopweed, which has got a very different look compared to all the other ones. And it is a much smaller plant. So I do want to put this on the edge of the wildflower garden. If I put this in between the coreopsis and the black-eyed Susans and the bees balm and the goldenrod, it will get overtaken very easily. The other thing I need to consider when it comes to the mox bishopweed is that it is a host plant. And one of the things that generally is true with host plants is we don't want to put them in places that the butterfly is not going to go. Now I have yet to see any black swallowtails in the area, so I don't know that I'm going to get any of them anyways, but we will put it in a location that feels like we might get some traffic to it. So right now we have that sequence of blue-eyed grass Stokes, blue-eyed grass Stokes, blue-eyed grass Stokes, so on and so forth. And we want to mix that up to make sure that it doesn't feel too much like a pattern to the human eye, because otherwise it won't feel very wildflower. But what we could do is we can swap in some of these mox bishopweed to help break apart the pattern. Or the other thing is that when you're dealing with a pattern, the longer the sequence of the pattern, the less the human eye quickly picks up on it, and it will feel more wild. So now our pattern is blue-eyed grass Stokes, blue-eyed grass bishopweed, blue-eyed grass bishopweed, blue-eyed grass Stokes. So there is still a pattern, but also because of this curve, the human eye is not going to pick up on it as much, but again, it will still feel more controlled and aesthetically pleasing, so we can play with that. But that leaves us with 2 Stokes. Impulse buying is always complicated. Okay, so now going back to our wildflower garden, final look. We've got our blue curl back in where it used to be, the one that died, so that will go right there. And then of course we were going to put in our blue-eyed grass where we had the 2 that died on us. And then we did that intermix pattern, right? Stokes, blue-eyed grass, mox bishopweed, blue-eyed grass, Mox Bishopweed, blue-eyed grass, Stokes, blue-eyed grass. And then we're just gonna put the other two over here for right now. I may install them right there, I may not. I haven't made a final decision on it. So here we are back at the Monarch Milkweed Garden. If you remember from last year, we had 12 pink swamp milkweeds in here. Of course, we had our gorgeous giant ironweed, and then we mixed in a couple of black-eyed Susans and a couple coreopsis kind of to the rear. But what the challenge has been for the area is that, well, on the good side, the giant ironweed has really flushed out way more than it was last year. Last year it was mostly just a singular stalk, maybe 2 or 3. And now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9 stalks coming up, which are going to be very gorgeous, very tall. Probably have to go and secure them to the tree at some point because they do fall over with a good wind. The other thing is the porterweed did great, but the challenge was only a few of the swamp milkweed came back, and then I added some butterfly weed. So what we're going to do is take that pink swamp milkweed, we're going to mix it back in. I'll probably follow a very similar pattern to what I had before, but because the porterweed has done such a good job, the actual original garden ended back here. And slowly over time, this porterweed has been pushing out in sections, taking over more and more grassy area, which is great. We love that. But what we also want to do is we've got a few other plants that we want to intermix in so that we can bring in some other color, other types of flowers that are beneficial to our pollinators. So let's go get those in, and let's talk about why we're putting them where. First thing I'm going to focus on is laying out where all this extra swamp milkweed's going to go. I've got 6 of them, and I've got about 6 plants already existing in there, but with the giant ironweed getting bigger, it's blocking out a little bit of the locations I might have used. So what I'll do is I'll start figuring out exactly where they're gonna go. And then, because the idea is I wanna space them out so all the caterpillars aren't on the same plant, which we got some caterpillars right here, yay! It's always nice to buy a plant and then bring wildlife with you home. So we're gonna go and we're gonna spread these into the area before we go and deal with the other flowers that we have left. But as we look in this garden, I know it's a lot of green, but there's an existing milkweed right here. It comes from this one that's from last year. We have another one right here, and then there's another one back here. There's a nice little gap in my porterweed, so I'm putting it in right here. There's another gap in the porterweed, so I'll put one right there. And then, I'll probably just put another one right here. And then we'll go to the other side and try to put some in over there. So again, here I have some butterfly weed, some pink swamp milkweed, and then you can see how the ironweed has just started to lean towards the western sun. So it's not leaving me a lot of gaps. I also got a wild petunia right here, but I could squeeze another one in right here. And then I want to stay away from the sidewalk. Last year when I did this, I ended up putting some a little bit closer to the sidewalk, and then they were always in our way, which really isn't great for the caterpillars because we were knocking into the branches all the time. I can see that I used to have a milkweed right there, but just because the ironweed's coming so far this way, I might try to sneak one in here. And we'll sneak one in here. So now if you guys can see, we've got milkweed, 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 milkweed back there, milkweed there, and milkweed even back here. So now we've kind of spread it around. Man, this is gonna be really deep in the porterweed. So we'll have a lot of locations. Next up, we've got a few other plants to go and find spots for. And now as we kind of finish off the area, I didn't add any in this front section. I've basically left as porterweed and milkweed. And I've added our other flowers, our orange coneflower, purple coneflower on this back side. And that's so that we kind of just create some space. I mean, this porterweed, look, this is the original garden. It has taken us a lot further out. So I just want to start to fill in this gap and allow that porterweed to continue this way. And it's similar on this side. I just spread them out, kind of filling in gaps. Again, this is one of my least constructed areas, so I just want there to be some color. So we'll have the orange in the back, we'll have purple coneflower here. They both got some space to spread out and fill in, even if they move towards the sidewalk. And then I use that brownie plant we're gonna use that to fill in this backside of the pine because goodness gracious, I'm really tired of these little clovers. And these are not nice little clovers. These clovers are really annoying. They have little seed pods that fling in your face, and it's very annoying to be planting in them all the time. So I would prefer that I have something start to block this out. The porter we will eventually start to fill in this area, but at least in the near future, we'll have that. So I made the final call. I'm gonna actually put these 2 Stokes Asters in here. I don't know that this is the best location for them, but I just feel like we need a bit more color. While the milkweeds can flower, they just honestly never get time to get there. The amount of monarch activity, it'll usually be summer into fall before we'll actually get flowers on them. Or if we get them, they're there for a minute. That's really why I liked adding this, because it brought in a lot more color compared to just a lot of green. That's really what this area tends to be. So adding a little bit more pop of color, even if it's not the most ideal location, we're just gonna go with it this year. Now that we got all those native wildflowers installed, we'll definitely check back in on this in a couple of months. And if you want to see from the original install, go ahead and check out this video, or if you want more tips on how to get more monarch butterflies, check out this video right here. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye!